As the days leading up to Thanksgiving grow darker, Jessica becomes more and more consumed with the terror hanging over Plymouth. She can no longer ignore the gnawing sense of dread that grows inside her every time she steps out of the house. The streets, once so familiar and comforting, now feel alien to her. Each creak of a floorboard in her home, each gust of wind rattling the windows, sends her heart racing. Every noise feels like the approach of the killer lurking just beyond the corners of her life. The town's atmosphere is electric with fear. People whisper in hushed voices about the murders, and some even claim that the killer is a ghost, cursed by the events of Black Friday. The psychological toll on the residents becomes apparent. Those who survived the stampede are plagued by nightmares. The survivor's guilt becomes a pervasive force in the town. Everyone begins to question their own actions on that fateful day. Was there something they could have done to prevent the chaos? Should they have done more for the people who died? The weight of these thoughts drives the townsfolk to look over their shoulders, to double-check the locks on their doors, to avoid eye contact with their neighbors. Jessica's sense of isolation only deepens as she grows more desperate for answers. She feels cut off from her friends and family, even as they all face the same fear. But her own guilt begins to manifest in darker ways. Her mother, for instance, insists on keeping the Thanksgiving dinner traditions alive, setting the table with fine china and baking pies as if nothing is wrong. But Jessica can't shake the feeling that this is all just a facade, a desperate attempt to cling to normalcy when, in truth, the town is on the brink of unraveling. Her mother's need for the holiday to remain untainted by the horror becomes almost obsessive. It's as if she believes that by keeping the holiday alive, she can stave off the growing darkness. As the murders continue, the killer's signature becomes clearer. Each crime scene is meticulously staged, with the specific message tied to Thanksgiving's iconic elements. A young woman is found buried in a pile of stuffing, her face obscured by a turkey platter. A family is discovered with their hands bound, their faces smeared with cranberry sauce, their bodies left in grotesque poses, as if mocking the very idea of a Thanksgiving feast. It becomes clear that the killer is not just seeking revenge but making a statement about the hypocrisy and false purity of the holiday. Each murder speaks to the idea that there are dark forces at play behind the warm, welcoming smiles of the Thanksgiving table. Jessica, still reeling from her own survivor's guilt, begins to suspect that her family might not be safe. The killer's messages have become increasingly directed toward "Here you're next." One text reads, followed by an image of a carving knife. But Jessica knows that this killer is not simply acting out of rage. There's a deeper motive at play. As she digs further, she uncovers startling connections between her family and the tragedy of Black Friday. She recalls that her father had been one of the first people to arrive at the store that day. While he had intended to close the shop early, his decision to do so had ultimately played a role in the congestion at the department store. Had his actions indirectly contributed to the carnage? The guilt gnaws at him every day, even though he remains silent on the matter. Is he somehow tied to the killer's motives? Meanwhile, Gabriella, always the brave and fearless one in the group, takes it upon herself to investigate the murders more thoroughly. She starts interviewing the relatives of the victims, piecing together their stories. What she discovers is more chilling than she expected. Several of the victims had been involved in altercations during Black Friday, either fighting for the same item or displaying callous indifference to others' suffering. But there's a strange pattern emerging. One of the victims was a known activist who had organized protests against the consumerism that Black Friday represents. Another victim was a store manager, who had turned a blind eye to the safety hazards in the store. The more Gabriella digs, the more she realizes that the killer is targeting those who, in some way, exploited or contributed to the tragedy. It isn't just about vengeance, it's about sending a message about the evils of excess, greed, and indifference. The sheriff, who has been investigating the murders, grows increasingly frustrated with the lack of progress. His calm and methodical nature clashes with the growing hysteria in the town. His attempts to keep order only fuel the panic. Some townspeople begin to point fingers, accusing their neighbors, while others question whether the sheriff is doing enough to stop the killer. The longer the murders go unsolved, the more distrust spreads throughout Plymouth. The town is being torn apart by fear and suspicion. People begin to lock their doors at night, double-checking that their windows are secure, and even when they do venture out, they move in groups. Children are no longer allowed to play outside after dark. The entire town is on edge, each person grappling with their own anxieties and suspicions. But Jessica's fears soon turn into a nightmare of their own. After a particularly disturbing phone call, one in which the killer taunts her with cryptic messages and distorted latter, she begins to feel as if she is being followed. Every time she steps out of her house, she looks over her shoulder, convinced that the killer is lurking in the shadows. Her paranoia begins to take a toll on her. She's unable to sleep, unable to eat, her mind consumed by the terror that has taken root in her life. She has trouble distinguishing between what is real and what is imagined. Is the killer truly stalking her, or is she simply losing her grip on reality? The horror is no longer just physical, it's psychological. The tension reaches a boiling point on Thanksgiving Day. Jessica's family gathers around the dinner table, their forced smiles hiding their deep fear and uncertainty. Jessica's father, who has been obsessively checking his phone, finally admits that he has been receiving strange, threatening messages as well. But they can't stop. They have to pretend everything is fine, for the sake of the holiday, for the sake of tradition. As the meal is served, Jessica notices something strange. The food, though it looks normal, seems to shimmer with an airy glow under the flickering candlelight. Her unease grows, and she looks up just as the power goes out. The room is plunged into darkness. The tension is palpable, the silence oppressive. A single scream shatters the stillness. A shadowy figure moves in the darkness, and the killer strikes. The next few moments are a blur of terror as Jessica and her family fight for survival. The pilgrim masked killer moves with chilling precision, targeting each member of the family one by one. The terror in the air is almost suffocating, as the family scrambles to defend themselves. But in the chaos, Jessica realizes that the killer is not just after revenge. They are making a statement about the greed, excess, and violence that Black Friday has come to represent. In the final moments of the film, Jessica confronts the killer. The truth about their motives is revealed in a shocking twist, one that ties directly into the deep-seated drama and guilt of Plymouth's residents. The killer is not some random stranger, but a person whose life was forever changed by the events of Black Friday, a person who felt invisible in the chaos of the day and, in their twisted mind, was seeking to purge the town of its hypocrisy. The film ends on a haunting note, as Jessica stands alone, bruised and broken but alive. As she walks away from the wreckage of her family's home, she reflects on the cost of denial, the price of ignoring the truth, and the horrors that lurk beneath the surface of a seemingly perfect holiday. The pilgrim mask lies discarded in the distance, but it's clear that the darkness it represents will never truly fade away. For Jessica, there is no return to innocence, no going back to the way things were before that fateful Black Friday. The weight of what she has endured will haunt her forever.